And today I am joined by Marva Sadler. Marva is a small business, high stakes problem solver, specializing in partnerships, operations, exits, financial turnarounds, and she takes immediate and decisive action to maximize organizational outcomes with her clients. She also has an MBA from BYU, and she is a theory of constraints Jonah. Marva, thank you so much for joining me again.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. And the first episode was so much fun. I can't wait for this one.
Yeah, the second episode's a little different because we get into some cautionary tales. And so this is where I'm sure you've got, plenty. We're going to try and stay focused on two today, but the cautionary tales are really a chance for viewers to really kind of see what happens if people don't listen to advice, or they maybe don't even know what questions to ask. And so sometimes they get into some pretty sticky situations. And the one that we left off the first episode with is where I'd like to start. And so, Marva, you mentioned this company is a direct-to-consumer company, and they were maybe trying to shift a little bit in their business model. And so I kind of labeled it as almost the kiss of death. And what I mean by that is you think that you're getting something really great, this great opportunity to maybe sell into a big box retailer or some national brand, but it's really not what it's cracked up to be. What happened in your cautionary tale?
Well, there are actually several of them that have followed that same pattern, coming from different industries, different specialties. I'm going to focus on one that actually was a makeup and cosmetics business that was selling direct to consumers primarily through Instagram and Facebook. And they were doing a few $1 million in a year in business, very high end, pretty revolutionary, a mud-based mask, and a number of other products that were natural mineral products related to that. And they decided that they weren't getting enough growth through direct sales to consumers. They wanted to make a big splash. They started talking to retailers, and they built an entire strategy around marketing to retailers. They picked a retailer, they talked to that retailer, they went through a whole process. They made wonderful financial projections that were going to take them to millions of dollars, and all they needed to do was raise a couple million to make it happen. And I came along about that time because they were struggling. Their consumer business had declined. Their retail business had not picked up yet. And we ran into some pretty significant problems. The first time I looked at the spreadsheets that their financial advisors had built for them to help them raise funds, I asked some questions that they didn't like. And my first question was, you're projecting $1 million in sales starting next month. Do you have a contract yet? And their answer was, well, no, not yet, but we're going to get it. And I said, well, don't you need to go revise your financials if in fact the contract is not yet in hand? The second question I asked them was, if you were to get the contract, the agreement next month, how long would it be before they place their first order? We're talking about a retailer with 1,000 stores. They're going to place that first order, but it will take them a time to process it through their system, and it will take them time to decide how they're going to display. And there are a whole bunch of other things that happen when you're working with a really big organization. They tend to make big decisions and move slowly. And their answer was, well,
I would imagine that this company, you've worked with these types of companies before. And so, going from maybe a small business owner, and I don't want to, sound disparaging, but $1 million in revenue is probably small potatoes for a retail like the one you're referring to with thousands of stores. So yeah, things are going to move a little bit slower.
A lot slower. And you're right that $1 million would have doubled, a big piece of their business. At the same time, $1 million was a gnat to this retailer. And so the next thing became, okay, how long will it take till they place an order? 3 months. Great. How long will they give you to deliver on that order? Another 3 months. Okay, and how long will it take you to produce that order? 6 months. I said, we have a mismatch. You don't have enough production capacity. You can't produce what they're asking for as their initial order in the time frame that between when they commit and when they're going to need the product. And they said, oh, well, we'll solve that. And then I found the next thing. I said, generally speaking, when you're talking to a big retailer, they only reset their shelves on some periodic basis because they have to plan their strategies and they have to figure out when they're going to introduce the product, and they have to warn their current suppliers that they're shutting down. When is their reset? So they went back and asked, and it turned out their reset was not for another 9 months. So they'd been projecting this order and that the order would be delivered at a certain time, but the reset was 6 months beyond that. And they hadn't factored that in. So when we calculated it all out, I said, so you're not really going to get the order in 3 months. You're not making revenue next month. You're not going to get the order in 3 months. You're not going to deliver in 6 months. Oh, by the way, the reset doesn't happen for 9 to 12 months. So all of these projections you've made that you're trying to raise money on are false.
If you were sitting in the room with the CFO, I bet you would have seen some sweat on his brow, because that means that the whole financial model, right? The cash flow forecasts, the operational capacity constraints, hopefully the CFO is paying attention. And thank goodness you were able to be there to maybe ask some hard questions.
Well,
I always find it really interesting, Marva,
one more hard question, Matt, that we need to get on the table. I looked into their projections for their margins, and I said, now help me understand. You've got an 80% gross margin on your retail product, correct? And then, yeah, we do. And I said, great. You're still projecting an 80% gross margin when you go to retail. How is that possible? Because you're going to have to discount by 50% to get on the shelves. And they said, oh, that's just a mistake we'll change it. And I said, but you do understand what that will change in the financials, right? And at that point, the CFO, because the CFO was an external guy who was who had his team making these projections, he tried to tell me I didn't understand retail. And
oh boy.
And they ended up firing the whole CFO organization and getting a different one, and we built a different strategy. But that's kind of just in a microcosm, a cautionary tale of these are the big elements that you have to think about when you move from I'm selling every day, I'm selling to lots and lots of people, and I'm making pretty good margins on those products because I'm selling at retail, to I'm now selling at a wholesale price where my costs are much more important. And I'm selling big orders in chunks with very long lead times. We haven't even talked about the fact that the lead time to then get paid was even longer than that, because a typical big retailer doesn't pay for at least 90 days. So you put your order on their shelves, and then 90 days later, if you're lucky, they pay you. You have to have a lot of cash to make that happen.
Yeah, that's a tough cautionary tale. I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's interesting that CFO wanted to argue with you. I mean, maybe that's just how some CFOs are. But it sounded like he needed an education, or she needed an education. I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but keystone pricing is such a central concept that I think a lot of small business owners have never heard of, but it really is important to understand the pricing models when you're going from a direct to consumer to a retail model. You are losing a considerable amount of margin, but you're hoping to kind of gain that with volume. But if you're only going to gain it with volume to then wait, potentially a year or more to see the cash, you are really kind of getting strung along. So that's a precarious position for a lot of financial professionals to try and navigate through. And it often puts companies under. And unfortunately, they could, grow right into bankruptcy, which is why I called it the kiss of death. When you're taking on these big orders, you have to be careful. And I'm not saying that you should never do business with Walmart or Home Depot or any of the big box stores. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying be careful. And it sounds like your advice, in working with this company was really important for them to hear. It reminds me of a company I wanted to bring up as a cautionary tale. This company manufactured candles, and believe it or not, the three guys that run the company, you would never ever guess that these three guys made candles. They were, big tattoos, mustaches, and beards, and muscles all over the place kind of guys, just like not really kind of your stereotypical, like I would, not think of them when I thought of maybe somebody who manufactures candles. But the reason I bring it up is because they had a really, really smooth running operation through Facebook and through Instagram with their business. They found out the algorithms. They had people set up on a monthly recurring revenue cycle. And so it wasn't just a one candle shot. It was, hey, can we get you on a monthly subscription? Which is actually pretty ingenious. You go through candles quite often. But they were approached with a similar opportunity. It was a big box store, said, hey, like we like the uniqueness of your candles, different scents that you have, the way that you brand them. It's all great. It look good on our shelves. And they literally told the retailer, no thanks, because it was just such a headache, right? It would have totally changed what they do and how they do it. They just didn't even want to deal with it. It was the biggest PO they would have ever had for sure, but they just didn't want to deal with it. They knew what they knew. They were making enough money the way that they were doing it, and they were just really happy with what they were doing. And so not every cautionary tale, goes super duper sideways, but they were keen enough to realize the issues that would probably going to arise with dealing with this big box retailer. One of the things you didn't mention was all of the lost opportunity, right? All of the focus is right out the window when you're dealing with this one contract. You've got your whole business kind of on stilts, waiting for them to pay and waiting for them to call you back. And it is not a good place for a business to be. If one executive decides to go on vacation for an extra week or so, or, you miss a few weeks of your payment, and then you've got, employees you've got to pay and rent to pay and all that, like it just is a snowballing effect that can ruin a company.
So I actually want to take you a little further into that same topic around the, kiss of death retailer. And I want to take you to what's on the back end. Different company, similar setup. This organization had a really unique product that they had been selling into construction projects for breaking up hard rock. And they were selling in small batches to kind of quarries and things like that. And they had packaged it for consumer use, and they tested it on how consumers could use it to break up rocks in their backyard or things like that. And they got themselves a contract with Home Depot and with Lowe's, and they were really excited about it. And they had built a lot of production capability and spent a lot of money on both building the production and also celebrating that they'd had these big orders that were going to make them millionaires. They'd kind of spent ahead of time. And then they realized the other kind of black death that comes with working with a big retailer, which is if the product doesn't sell, in the fine print in your contract is often the fact that they can return the inventory to you. And they suddenly started, they had over projected how many consumers would be buying these 40-gallon buckets of this construction stuff, because it basically takes 2 cups to break a rock. And so you'd have to have a boat ton of rocks to buy 50-gallon drums or even 30-gallon drums. And so suddenly hundreds of stores were reporting that the inventory wasn't moving, and Central Home Depot sent them back notice that they were going to start sending back the inventory, and they were going to have to pay the shipping costs. The Home Depot was going to deduct the amounts from the invoices that they still owed. They were going to significantly reduce their future orders, and they were only going to order the small stuff, the 2-gallon buckets. And there was this whole just influx of inventory coming back to them that they had no plans for. It was like 2 years of their regular consumption was coming back, and they weren't going to get paid for any of the stuff that was still outstanding. And that is something that I have seen repeated with several small organizations that pin their hats on the big retail orders. They don't pay enough attention to the fine print.
Yeah, unfortunately, the fine print gets a bad rap, but it's there to protect people, right? There's a reason why the companies like Home Depot are in business and doing well, and they're publicly traded, and they've got probably a team of attorneys looking at these different agreements and contracts. And so I hope this is a cautionary tale for those companies considering going into those big box retailers. I'm not suggesting that it'll never work, right? I don't want to be the don't ever do it guy, but I think that you just need to be really careful. I do work with another kind of consulting firm that specializes in retail, but they're on the other side of it. They're not trying to help people get into retailers. They're trying to help the retailers be profitable. Those consultants get a paycheck too. And those attorneys, need to provide value to their customers. And so, these different things in the fine print are often there to protect kind of the bigger player in the picture, unfortunately.
Well, so when I deal with businesses like that, rather than encouraging them to go all hog or telling them to stay away completely, I say, can you negotiate a deal where you test a market, or you test a few stores, so that the upfront expense to you is not so great, it doesn't dislocate you so much, and you get real data about usage, about adoption rates, about replenishment rates, so that then you can roll out slowly. And that is a difficult thing to negotiate with the retailer, because they want to be able to make a big splash. But if there are some products for which that is an appropriate approach, and if you've got a good relationship, you can negotiate that, especially if you've got a product that's pretty unusual, that they can't find and can't get 7 other people to supply to them. You can negotiate some kind of small region or few store test, which is a much better way to go about this than to just say, yes, I am going to dedicate my entire future fate into the hands of a single possible customer who has all the power in this relationship.
Yeah, one of the companies that does a really good job of helping small business owners with that is a company called Costco. They are sometimes referred to as, a test market platform. I think on Shark Tank they're mentioned from time to time. At least they're prominent in the Chicago market as being friendly to those pilot studies. They're willing to do the small batches. They're willing to do a little bit of those kinds of things to be able to help some of those retailers figure out what they're doing. And so you don't have to jump right into the big boy, pond, or the big girl pond with, the Walmarts of the world. You could try something smaller, like you said, with a pilot launch. Well, Marva, I wanted to transition to, kind of our third episode here in just a moment, because we set up our time together with unpacking this case study. And just to kind of remind people where we're at, we're in our second episode. We just finished kind of talking about some cautionary tales, and we were also talking about a case study. And to refresh people's memory, the case study was revolved around this manufacturing company selling directly into restaurants that was trying to kind of shift to more of a distribution model. And so in our next episode, we'll present some solutions to their different issues. 3 issues that Marva helped me identify. Number 1 was a people issue. Number 2 is a finance issue. And if you're keeping track of your notes at home, the third issue was operations. And so they've hit the trifecta, and I'm sure that Marva's got some great solutions here we'll get into in our third episode. Thanks.